So let's go to Cinderella.
Let's do it.
Cinderella, another wonderful
You've
one.
segued us. So it's a fairy tale that everybody knows.
I'm going to pull up.
We've chosen it's Marsha Brown, and this was a Caldecott winner. So this particular one has these very watercolor-like images.
Very bright colors.
That are, you said bright. To me, it looks very soft.
It's soft and bright. When I looked at it, I was like, oh my goodness, that's
it's really beautiful. It really is beautiful.
Yellow.
It is your traditional Cinderella story.
Right.
Except that it does, Cinderella in this particular book, translation, Cinderella forgives her stepsisters, which reminds me of Joseph and his brothers in the Bible. That was the big thing I noticed about this one that I thought was unique to a lot of the Cinderella stories that you read, where that forgiveness is either not there or just not. It just isn't a theme, but that is a theme of this particular one. And I know you love Cinderella too.
I do love Cinderella.
We're just going to get Leigh's favorite ones out of the way.
I'm sorry, and then but Cinderella is, the fairy tales are so important. The fairy tales, just have so much to teach us. And so I think there's a lot that you can talk about. First of all, the reason that Cinderella, becomes Cinderella, cinder seat, right, is what her name is derived from. She is pushed down because of the jealous stepmother, right? Mm-hmm. So this is something Joseph Pierce talks a lot about is, pride is by its very nature comparative, right? And so the stepmother can't be near Cinderella because she's not as beautiful and she's not as good. And so the stepmother literally, pushes Cinderella down and excludes her from her life because she cannot compete with that goodness. And it's pride. It's the sin of pride that has caused that. And then, Cinderella, throughout it all, she maintains her goodness. And so, I think that that's something admirable to point out is that, when she's doing her sister's hair, she could have done it in, bird's nests, but she still did it beautifully and she did her work well. And she still inquired about the ball and, she kept her goodness even in suffering, which is an important thing about her. And so, the story describes Cinderella as beautiful, but something my mother always said to me growing up is pretty is as pretty does. Pretty is as pretty does. And so in these stories for children, you often see that. You see that exterior beauty is a way to show the child that there's really interior beauty there. Right. And, we see that Jane Austen does that. There's, manners, so the way people behave, the way people look on the outside is often reflective of what's happening interior, on their interior. There's a great Wall Street Journal article about manners make the man. I had an article about that. But so I think that, the way that these characters are drawn is important to point out to the story that Cinderella is not loved because she's physically beautiful. It's because she's beautiful inside. She has a beautiful soul. The other thing that I think is really important about fairy tales is that the godmother, first of all, her name is a godmother, right? And so she could be called a fairy, but she's called a godmother. And so two words that, represent authentic, genuine love and authority, right? And so a person that a princess, a daughter, really should respect in if noble and good, God and mother, right? These are exemplars to this child. And so the godmother is the one that brings good. And she offers all this good. She wants all of these good things for Cinderella, but it's conditional, right? It's conditional. Cinderella can have, the coach and the coachman and the beautiful dress and the slippers and all of these things if she returns by midnight, right? And so there is a responsibility with this privilege, with this blessing. Cinderella has to, do her part. She has to operate on the conditions of the godmother who knows, what's going to happen if she doesn't. Cinderella doesn't know what's going to happen. The godmother just says, you have to return. And she doesn't have to explain herself, but Cinderella has to trust the godmother and operate on those conditions for the good and for the blessings to happen.
Gollum's ring. Wilbur and Charlotte. Paddington. Oh, hey there. I'm just listing off things that are precious. Speaking of, we know your time is precious. and we're so thankful that you're spending it here with us on Novel Thoughts. If you enjoy this episode and want to see more episodes like it, let us know by liking, commenting, and sharing this video with those who are precious in your life. Thanks for being here. Now let's get back to the episode.
This is the quintessential story about princesses and true love, and so much in literature then comes from this story that it's just I feel like second grade is the perfect time to introduce it. I remember watching that old TV show, and at that point for me it was just all about the love story.
Right.
When I watched that, but there's so much more to this than that love story, and I just really love this translation. But that literally ends, the book ends with the forgiveness. They beg for forgiveness, and then she grants it immediately. She forgave them with all her heart. She begged them to love her always. And then she does good for them. Yes. She gives them husbands. She marries them to two great lords of court. And it ends, the last sentence, Cinderella, who was as good as she was beautiful. So,
well, and even, and it's something that you can point out in that story is that she does forgive them. And it took quite a bit of humility for the stepsisters to apologize and ask for forgiveness.
That's right.
So, they weren't doomed to this bad character. They were able to change and become good. And Cinderella throughout the entire story is giving. And so another example of her goodness is, she goes to the ball. She's the belle of the ball, and she is the one giving gifts as the guest. Right. To the other guests of the ball, right? And so she is constantly giving of herself, of her talents, of her service, gifts, her forgiveness. And so she is pouring herself out into others, which is, she's physically beautiful, she's kind, and she is, a self-sacrificing, serving person. And so, there's so much.
In addition to a beautiful love story.
Right. And she gets new friends.
Right. Well, I think all of this is great because you're giving it is a vibrant story, and you're giving it to students who then, as you go on to teach your Christian studies down the road, you're going to talk about Jesus in the New Testament, talking to the Pharisees, and the Pharisees are all external beauty, all external goodness. They follow they've even gone beyond following the law and created their own laws to be as good as they could possibly be.
Right.
But they're whitewashed tombs. Jesus says they're whitewashed tombs. Their inside doesn't match their outside. And so if you've got a story like Cinderella, which just seems at this young stage like a story, we appreciate it more because we're older.
That's right.
As they get older, they'll realize, wait a second, no, she was both beautiful on the outside and the inside. That's what I want to be like. These stories are invitations to transformation. Yes. That if we want to be like Cinderella, then we've got to not just cultivate our outside, but our inside.
That's right. And her example of being good all the time in the face of the awful way that the entire family treated her, did that make the difference in the stepsisters then knowing that they needed to ask her forgiveness? Was she an example to them? But all of that is much deeper than you just really want students to enjoy this story.
That's right.
And you don't want to spend a lot of time doing what we're doing here, but you do want to introduce the concept of somebody that is not just beautiful on the outside, but on the inside in a way that a second grader can understand that and how she did transform other people's lives as well with her goodness. So,
and you can ask the child. You don't have to tell the child. You can ask the child. A well-written story, the child will recognize the truth in the story.
I think so.
Why is Cinderella good? Ask your daughter. She will know. She will.
Oh, she does. Every now and then she'll say something. I'm like, well, okay, you've analyzed it. I was not expecting that.
That's right. So I think that, just ask the question. And I think we're I'm constantly stunned by what children say.
Yes.
They have, we can talk about innocence speaks truth, right? Yeah.
Let's move on because that I think is just the natural place to go. Here we have someone who's beautiful on the outside and inside, but here we have somebody in the Emperor's New Clothes who's beautiful on the outside, but maybe not on the inside.
Right.
So where does that fit? How does that continue to...
Well, it's another fairy tale that they need to know because the Emperor's New Clothes that's an illusion that comes up a lot. And you just read it, right?
I mean,
you knew the story.
I knew the story. I just
Our.
read that particular version of it.
Right.
But yeah, I know the story. I've seen, cartoon adaptations of it,
That's
as we
right.
all have, I'm sure. But yes,
That's
it's kind of a foil to Cinderella, but it's still giving you the same thing that no, you have to be a person who's not just vain. You have to be a person
this is about pride before a fall.
That's right.
It's funny.
It is.
But it's also terribly humiliating and embarrassing. And I think children can recognize that.
Yeah.
I think that this is a great example of, we talk about how we want students to believe in things unseen, but the converse is that is you also need to accept fact that you can see.
That's
and
right.
so, what's happening in this story is the reverse of that. It's, they're being conned, right? And everyone, it's groupthink, right? It's
That's
groupthink
exactly
is
what it
exactly
is.
what's happening here. And again, it's pride that's causing it, right? Because every single minister or, all of the aides to the king, the pride is the thing that's causing their downfall.
They don't want to admit.
They will not admit that they are not worthy of their jobs, right?
That's right.
And so they are too embarrassed to acknowledge the truth because their pride would be hurt if they did that. And so, in this story, what's happening is, all of these, everyone sees the truth, but no one has the courage to say it because of this sin that is, just pervasive in the community. And so it is important to show that innocence, the child, right? The innocent child is the one who speaks the truth, right? He's the one that has the courage. He is stripped of the pride. He is not embarrassed. He's not afraid to say the truth. And everyone, is just embarrassed that they didn't do
That's
it,
right.
But I mean,
That's right.
you can see how, that this one's kind of scary, I think, actually.
It is. It is scary because it happens.
Right.
It's happened to all of us. Where you're in a group and you're thinking, okay, this is crazy.
Right.
But you are afraid to say anything because you're like the sole person, except for the child. The child who doesn't have that built into him yet says, wait a minute, he's not wearing any clothes. Because the child hasn't been taught yet to
and doesn't have the pride. I mean, just has like a genuine, earnestness about him. That and that's a very common theme in literature, and it's something that to look out for. And I think this is a great way to introduce that in a story. When you read a story, one of the things that you look for is something that just sort of irks you, right? Something that just ruffles you, that doesn't feel right. And that's when there's a dishonesty, right? And so a student recognizes that. We all recognize that when there's a deceptive character or, Mansfield Park. I mean, when there's someone who's not being truthful. And so they can look for, the character who's going to call attention to that. And, it's innocence in Shakespeare, it's often the fool, right? I mean, it's the one that you don't suspect, right? It's the one that you would underestimate who often gives you the truth.
That's right. That's King Lear.
Yeah,
I mean, that is just throughout King Lear.
Right. So, these are ideas.
This is King Lear. And the father says the child tells the truth. The child tells the truth. He has nothing. And then all of a sudden, everybody's brave.
That's right.
But they just needed that one. We just all need to be childlike in this situation. And I will do a disclaimer. This does not have blatant nudity in it. They have gently. He's a very small character and there's nothing that would be graphically offensive in the way this book is illustrated.
Something else.
This is Virginia Lee Burton.
I know, Virginia Lee Burton, which we
did
have
the illustrations,
which is also Mabel, which we can go to next. But one other thing about The Emperor's New Clothes is craftiness. And so something that you see, I think a lot in literature is handiwork, particularly weaving. So you see, Penelope weaving. Charlotte is a weaver. Arachne in Greek mythology, and so weaving and handiwork is often sometimes seen in literature, and it can be used sort of to slow time as a symbol of patience. Right. But in this story, I think it's interesting because I think it's maybe used to to sort of spell out both meanings of the word crafty, right? And so, you can be crafty and cunning to good ends, or you can be crafty and deceitful like these weavers. And so, just I think even pointing out that the word crafty has two connotations,
That's excellent.
And that's what's happening in this story. And so the handiwork is an opportunity to talk about how we can look for, just even the connotations of words and how an author might choose, particular details in a story to point out what's happening.
Well, and if you recall this, and you may not, but if you recall this when you get to Penelope in the Odyssey, you know that she's also being crafty.
Right.
But she's doing it to remain faithful, to stay steadfast.
To her husband.
And she is tearing out everything that she's done just because she's committed to these people that, yes, I'll take one of these suitors whenever I'm done with my task.
Right.
And so every night she goes and she unravels her
That's
garment. But here, one of the things that, playing off of this, that I wanted to bring up is that they're consistently called, the weavers are called wicked. They're consistently called wicked throughout. And I think that is very helpful because at this level, students still need to know, you read this story and you want the emperor to get his comeuppance. You want him to be humbled, if you will.
Right.
But even so, one of the complexities about this, and I think it's fine to bring out a complexity like this, is that even though they are doing something that you want to see him humbled, they're actually serving him and humbling him. They're still wicked because they're still being crafty and deceiving.
Right.
Yes.
Right.
That's a very good point, that this really is about deceit.
Yes.
It's not just about people, about the groupthink, which is the first thing I think about.
Yeah.
But a word too on the way this is written on the prose, that then will segue us to Maybelle, because Virginia Lee Burton does the same thing in Maybelle the Cable Car. But she puts these thought bubbles in here, and we actually get people's thoughts in here in a way that I don't think we've seen yet in a book.
I think you're right. I think this is one of the first times you get
so this
that.
is really like you've got the story, and then you've literally got the character's thoughts inside a bubble. And she does the exact same thing in Maybelle. It uses thought bubbles too, which I thought was interesting.